to Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 44, Obscura, Ablaze My Sorrow.
Welcome to the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm your host, Jason.
And I'm Mark.
And you just heard Choir of Spirits from a band called Obscura, which will be featuring as one of our two bands tonight.
We're going to change it up a little bit. It's been, 5 weeks or so of just, parts 1, part 2, pretty exhaustive stuff. So we want to kind of change it up a little bit.
Yeah, and Mark and I actually haven't seen each other for a while. Probably not since New Year's Eve, or right before New Year's Eve, I think. Because we actually recorded like 6 weeks worth of podcasts when Chris was here. We had to use the slave labor while we had it kind of thing, because Chris is such a nice resource to be able to...
Plus he was sick, which is even better.
Yeah, we were cracking the whip on him. Yeah.
You have to go in the other room and cough and all that stuff.
But lots happened actually. New president. I
got married.
I lost his back on television. Of minor importance in various order. But but anyways, a few things have happened, especially if you've been kind of a loyal podcast listener. One of the things that unfortunately happened is after we recorded all those ones with Chris, the place that you do all the post-production for
the hosting service, TalkShoe.com, have tweaked things a little bit, which has made the shows had to be like about 3 minutes shorter. So
actually like 7. Because we used to be able to get to an hour and 47 minutes, and now we can only get to about an hour and 40.
Hour 40 or an hour 35 is about as far as I like to take it anymore.
Yeah, so we had all these pre-recorded talk sets with all this music already set into place, and then all of a sudden you had to sit down and slice and dice things.
Over. Yeah, so the Dokken one might have been a little bit... there's some...
You heard about a minute of Shadows of the Life, but...
take it or leave it.
But that's the 90s Dokken, so if we're going to act something...
Most of the essential stuff in there.
Although I was telling you, I was a little upset with the explosive vocals of Into the Fire that comes out of the solo that we had to cut out. Heartbroken.
Pick your battles on those things.
But in particular, you had to kind of jump in there with the My Dying Bride one, and obviously, I think you did an awesome job, especially in those last 3 or 4 podcasts, like really kind of getting it coordinated with the music over top of the talk sets and stuff. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to have it a little bit more, how when you listen to I don't listen to radio anymore, but when I used to listen to the radio and it was like a nicely produced program, you'd have a little bit of the music start before they actually kick into the set. And just trying to make it more of like an old time or like a 80s radio experience than some podcasts that I've heard.
Sure. Well, and it was, you were stuck between a rock and a hard place. I obviously, did a nice job. So just in case you were listening, wonder what kind of schizophrenia we were suddenly up to, and, you've been listening to it for, maybe a couple months or something. We didn't just decide to, pick apart a bunch of songs and do that on purpose. Yeah. That was kind of happened. But, but anyways, things have been... there's some kind of new developments, I guess, up on the front.
We actually have a website.
The website.
Yeah, it's go to requiempodcast.com, and that's it's kind of in beta still. It's got most of the features there ironed out, but eventually it's going to have like a full interactive archive section. So eventually I'd like to not use the TalkShoe service anymore and just go straightly.
And that would give us that freedom if we need to go a little longer on a talk set or something like that, because there was a long song or something. We got talking a little bit more.
Well, and sometimes with TalkShoe, since it's a free hosted service, sometimes they put their own little this was produced on TalkShoe or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to give anybody free advertising for
something that they're really.
Well, they're giving us free hosting, but still I'd like to keep it all kind of self-contained. So go to requiempodcast.com, and we've got playlists up. We're gonna have some more old some of the old magazines are gonna be featured in there eventually here.
Sure. And I've had some requests to possibly put a message board up there and get people maybe talking, and
if we get some more interest, I can get some numbers on how many people would want to use it.
Yeah,
and I can institute it. It's kind of a pain to do that, but if people want it, then
sure. And let us know what kind of features you're looking for as well. And you can send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Which we have gotten quite a bit of feedback, and I know sometimes I just get verbal feedback because a few of my students here and there are listening to it and telling me what they like on a weekly basis and stuff. And I'm always like, email it to us, post things, because then it sets it in the stone so we don't forget about these things. So,
well, I've done some some vanity searches on Google, just looking at the thing, and there's quite a few pretty good just little reviews or blurbs on people's websites, and it's usually,
all the reviews on iTunes have been really positive that we've gotten.
Usually the only complaint is you guys suck, you make me spend too much money on CDs.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, sorry, man.
Which now on the that's the other nice thing too, kind of to help cut down, help make it easier for people to get some of the music that we're talking about on the website. There's links directly to Amazon off of like our playlists and things like that.
Yeah, and if you would, it actually helps us out with the costs. We get a little bit of that kickback from Amazon. If you don't want to necessarily send us a donation or something,
we're good capitalists.
It would be great to offset the cost of hours of editing stuff, travel costs, website hosting, all that kind of stuff. Would be fantastic.
Sure. So yeah, and this has been a particularly nice week for me because I got to go skiing up north and I finished one of my master's classes, so I feel like I'm ready to get back into the podcasting world. Lost is in the middle of some good stuff. But speaking of podcasts, I know you do the other art and story podcast. I mean, they've been going pretty well?
Oh yeah, we've actually, our numbers are getting actually really big now, which is pretty good. So,
and just in case people who are new to this don't know, Mark is a comic artist and graphic artist and does some things, and you guys do an actual podcast about that.
2 a week, about the ins and outs, nuts and bolts of of comic creation. So.
Me, I just listen to like 3 Lost podcasts a week. That's my other podcasting life outside of Requiem metal stuff. And the other thing I wanted to mention as well that Mark and I are kind of working on, and I just wanted to give props to a couple people that are helping us out right now. A couple of my students, Kevin Klein and Chris Toby, are actually in the process of compiling the 2 magazines that Mark and I, Mark was both part of both of them, but I was a reader of one and a part of the other, which is Requiem and Eclipse. We're actually going to be compiling them into kind of nice anthologies.
Nice big tomes. Yeah, for those that don't know, I don't know when the last time we mentioned this, but the name Requiem used to be Requiem magazine from like 92 to 97 or something. Underground metal fanzine, and eventually just kind of, this is, podcasting almost seems like the kind of the next way of instead of the fanzine thing, this is like kind of the next generation way to do it. It's like, because by the time you get a fanzine printed anymore, it's outdated is it?
Yeah, unless you're like Decibel or Maniacs or Terrorize or something like that, and even Metal Maniacs isn't making it anymore. They're folding.
Done.
Yeah, so it's kind of a sad day in the metal world for that.
But yeah, for anybody interested, we're going to have the full 7 issues, which is going to be close to like 700 pages or 600 pages of Requiem.
Yeah, and then the same for Eclipse as well.
Same for Eclipse, yeah.
So it'll be kind of neat because it'll give us a chance to kind of go back over and add some things to it, and add like a forward and talk about how
bad some
embarrassing
of the for a while.
Some of the. I was reading some of my reviews in Eclipse #1. It's tormenting almost to think about, freshman year in college, I think.
Yeah, I had some my junior year of high school that are in there, so you can imagine how great my writing was. So.
That's all right. That's all part of the process. What have you been listening to lately? Anything kind of catch your fancy? Because it's been a couple months since we really talked.
Oh, geez, yeah.
I know one of them's the Obscura, which we'll get into in a second here. But
oh, geez, I'm trying to think. We just ate sushi too, so I'm kind of in a fish coma.
I know the new Napalm Death in particular is something that's kind of caught my fancy. Time Waits for No Slave.
My playlist,
so
on the website.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what else I've been kind of jonesing on. Bathory, obviously, which we both been kind of preparing for a Bathory show.
Oh, and yes, since the grindcore issue of Decibel came out.
Oh yeah,
going back, and I picked up like Phobia and some Rotten Sound stuff.
That Rotten Sound Murder Works is it called Murder Works? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Discordance Access. I went out and grabbed that as well. So,
and the new Decibel Omega EP.
Oh yeah, that's pretty tight. I've actually been discovering some old like Swedish death metal like demos and things like House of Usher and Crematory and Excretion and some
the
really
beauty of
kind of rare
of technology now.
Yeah, some rare stuff I've been able to unearth on the internet. So be on the lookout for possibility of that as well. So, but anyways, and one of the things that commonly Mark and I have been talking about since even when Chris was here with us right before New Year's Eve was this band Obscura, because Chris had brought it with him and he was kind of touting it as like, hey, this is this is gonna be something big. And then we had gotten a copy of it from Chris, and then it was like that following week that Decibel came out, and there was a feature on that. They gave it a 9, which is pretty high for Decibel. They don't give too many 9s or 10s out these days. And it kind of prompted me to go back and listen to this again. And obviously what you heard there on Choir of Spirits, I was telling Mark, one of probably my most listened to song of the last couple weeks from this particular record. And the record, in case you're wondering, it's called Cosmogenesis, and it's a 2009 release on Relapse. And they're a German band. This is their second full length. We're gonna hear a tune from their first full length called Retribution here in a second. But Obscura was made up of two guys that diehard metal fans might be familiar with, or at least familiar with their bands. Christian Musner. Gosh, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. From he's a guitar player from Necrophagus, and then Jean Paul Thessalin, who is the bass player for Pestilence on the Spheres record,
and currently, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
No, Tony Choi is back in the band. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm almost positive. And then the band's rounded out by Stefan Kummer and another gentleman who I can't find his name right offhand. I don't know. Someone. Where does he go?
Is he in the fold-out?
Yeah, he's somewhere. Oh, Hans Grossman. So, but they're a German tech band, for sure. Technical death metal. I mean, a lot of, atheist, death, human, symbolic era death stuff. Obviously cynic in terms of some vocal things there. Necrophagus, if you're familiar with Necrophagus, that sort of, technical, morbid angel Nile kind of.
Uber technical.
I mean, almost like so much so that it like boggles your mind after a couple songs. You can't really listen to it. But there's some really nice kind of melodic overtones in there. There's a few opethy parts. We've even picked out parts that remind us of like Blind Guardian or Demons and Wizards, So one of the problems that you often encounter, I think, with technical death metal is the prowess and skill of it trumps the musicality and songwriting so much. And I think Obscura, to me, and you could hear it in a song like Choir of Spirits, where it's balanced by those sort of cynic vocals and just really tasteful, almost spiritual guitar soloing that you heard in there.
Well,
it's not
I think
just
they've got
noodling,
Yeah, because that's my biggest thing with technical death stuff, like really tech death or prog death stuff, is that it's too much, and it's just showing off. Oh, look how great I can play the guitar, but it's not listenable, really, to me at least. And this seems almost like almost like a jazz kind of feel, and not like a jazz fusion, because I know that's going to make people cringe hearing that. But as far as how the members interact, how the drummer's not just playing a straight 4/4 beat all the time, and they're all over the place. Everything's kind of interconnected and weaved together. And then there's a song which. There's actually a song where like, hey man, that really swings.
It was Choir of Spirits. Yeah. And I was like, it was like right at like the 250 mark, right before it jumps into that awesome solo. It's when the cynic vocals come out for the first time. And you're right, like everything comes together and you can start to feel that song like swing in that same sort of like way that a great like 30s, 40s, 50s jazz song just sort of swung.
Everything comes together and
and it's a beautiful thing. And the other thing that's really cool about it is that Thessalin's playing a fretless bass, and he's
playing it well. It's because you can play fretless bass really easily, really bad, in my opinion. I either really like it or I think it's absolute crap. But
and to me, this isn't just like the way that say Choi approached it on like some of the Unquestionable Presence stuff from Atheist, where it was there, but it was very mechanical and proggy on purpose. This is like it's all in the mix, it's all in the flow.
Yeah, and he's not necessarily like playing along with the drums or even like playing the same time signature as anybody else. He'll just hold a note and then 3 or 4 bars later, just like kind of drop it down a little bit, like doing really interesting stuff. And outside of all the technical aspects, they've got like incredibly brutal stuff too.
Yeah, you heard like almost like a cryptopsy, like speed and intensity going on in that song.
Suffocation, a little bit of that going
suffocation.
On
I mean, you'll hear Nile, especially in this next tune, which is an older tune from them. You're going to hear quite a bit of Nile and Morbid Angel and that really gut-busting solo that it jumps into. So the record, we're going to be looking at actually 2 bands tonight because of, with Obscura, they've only had 2 records out, and so we can't spend a whole lot of time. And pretty much after you hear like I think 3 or 4 of these tunes, you're going to say, oh, I need to buy this. I mean, like I can't imagine anyone who's a fan of metal not being able to appreciate some aspect of it or having some avenue of access.
Oh, sure.
Unless you just totally have you only like sort of simplified grindcore that depreciates any technical prowess or any ability of songwriting.
But it's still catchy too. It's not just overly archaically crazy or anything. Yeah. It's like you can nod your head to it.
Yeah, and then that's the key is songwriting, and these guys definitely have it in spades. And you also hear obviously some Pestilence too. That sort of like death metal thrash with some progressive elements kind of mixed in, you know. All right, so let's get back to some tunage, and we'll shut up here about Obscura. We're gonna play 2 tunes here. We're gonna hear "Alone" from Retribution, and in particular in this song, what you should try and pay attention to as much as possible is when they're going into this solo. It's like this bizarre like build up to the solo. You said you haven't heard like an explosive
It's like
solo.
a literal explosion right before it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty nifty. And then we're gonna come back with the anti-cosmic overload, which has a good deal of Blind Guardian kind of power metal anthemic parts to it, as well as some like acoustic opathy things. And then we'll close things out with Universe Momentum. So enjoy some Obscura. was Universe Momentum, Anti-Cosmic Overload, and then we started things off with Alone. I was just telling Mark that when I was explaining about those songs, what you just heard, Universe Momentum, was a song that I was thinking of that had the Opeth Blind Guardian kind of like soloing and riff patterns and stuff. We're going to kind of continue and kind of close things out with this next set of music with Obscura. And just to give you a little bit of preview, we're not just doing Obscura tonight, as we mentioned. We're actually going to be doing a Swedish band by the name of Ablaze My Sorrows, who some of you might be familiar with. Maybe their first album.
Their first album, I guess, I don't know if it was just in our circles. If not, it was pretty highly touted in fanzines and stuff at the time. But then there's such a weird... lots of years between albums, and then death metal died for a while, and then came back, and then
it's definitely not an odd one, but they're a good band to spend half a show on. Let's just put it that way, and they definitely deserve their due in a way, even though they're kind of the like ultimate cliche band, but they do it so well that it's okay, and we'll talk more about that later. But anyways, to jump back into our final set of music here with Obscura before we get into the Ablaze My Sorrow stuff, we're going to close out with two of the cooler tunes, I think, or two of the songs that jumped out, I think, the most to me immediately. Incarnated.
That definitely jumped out to me the most. I was like, oh wow, this sounds like Death Human.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bonus track,
like Lack of Comprehension, or which we should mention, Obscura actually covered Lack of Comprehension on their first record, Retribution, which, we were searching around on the internet a little bit. We couldn't figure out what the heck a label Retribution was on.
Unless it was a self-produced thing. We couldn't find it to buy or anything. So
it's kind of hard to track down, but we were able to kind of find some samples of it, obviously, with Alone, which you heard earlier. Like he was saying, this Incarnated tune has definitely a Death Human feel, but I also was saying that it's got like this umbrella of atheist, unquestionable presence sort of there, but again, they're getting away from being so obviously prog, you know, like it's this band has thrown me for a loop. It's sort of like, I don't know, in the same way that Opeth kind of throws you for a loop with how you could do like a progressive band but not be like Dream Theater, where it's like so overtly cheesy or like so like self-indulgent that you just have to kind of like detach from it, you know. There's definitely something not self-indulgent about this, but yet very like, I mean, these guys are at the top of their game, and you hear it in a song like Incarnated, which again sounds like pure death. I mean, even like the vocals sound like Chuck Schuldiner. You know?
I think it's total kind of homage to him. But.
So, and then New Spheres, which is a song we're going to kind of close things out. This, to me, when I first heard it, this is what I kind of thought the new Cynic would sound like before I heard the new Cynic.
Well, when you're talking about Cynic vocals, we're talking about the vocoder use that they're kind of known for.
Yeah, which you were never able to gel on back in the day with Focus.
The thing is,
you get it ruined.
Okay, yeah, because me and Chris, when we were doing the Requiem magazine years ago, we got a promo copy of Focus that had all death metal vocals. And I thought it was fantastic. And then I get the CD, and I was like, what is this? This is, absolute crap. What can they not? Why can't they just use, death vocals through the whole thing? So I was kind of a little bit, that turned me off to them for quite a few years.
And I can understand having heard,
yeah,
it's like you were.
It seemed like a watered, and at the time, I was young too, so I was like, oh, this is a, sellout crap version of what they really did. So yeah.
Which, the one that Grindcore Kuhn and I heard was, of course, Focus, and, we loved it from the get-go because it was so different when we heard it. And of course, that's why people venerate that record so much, because it stood out against the rest of the Florida death metal stuff at the time. And plus their associations with death and things like that. But anyways,
two of the main songwriters were Unhuman. So.
Yeah. And, but Cynic kind of disappeared for a while after Focus, which I think was 92, 93 that record came out.
Yeah, it's been reissued a couple, 2-3 times.
And they finally just at the end of last year put out a newer record. For the first time, like 14 years. And
really good production on it, but it's a little boring.
Yeah, it is. It sort of lacks some of that like energy that
it's got like a couple, 2-3 good standout songs, but as an album on a whole, it's a little
I think I wanted more euphoric form type songs, songs that like really went for the could grab you at times, you know. And to me, it sounded like a lot of the songs were like the instrumental off of Focus called Textures, which is a really cool tune, but it's it's just a great instrumental. If the whole album was to sound like all instrumental and kind of like lots of builds and I don't know. Anyways, I'm not slagging the new record, but in my opinion, this is what the new Cynic album should have sounded like. You know, this is what I was sort of looking for with a really proper use of the vocoder vocals and things like that. And the record, Cosmogenesis, was produced by a guy from a band that neither of us are terribly familiar with, but his name is
Dark Fortress?
Yeah, Dark Fortress, V Santura. And they're a German band, and again, if you're a Dark Fortress fan, you know, let me know if it's something we should check out, if it's something we would like. But anyways, he does some guest vocals on this tune, and I don't know if it's the vocoder vocals or not, but
yeah,
you know,
they're not very exacting with their credits.
No, you look through that booklet.
It's hard to find out who even plays what, you know.
Exactly. But anyways, it's a good way to close things off, and I think that No Spheres is sort of it's kind of the beautiful introspective song in its own right. You know, the solo is very tasteful. Everything about these two tunes are cool. So Incarnated is kind of the more brutal side of these guys, and No Spheres is sort of a nice mellow side to kind of close things out. So, any closing thoughts on?
Just as a whole, this is like the first, not the first, but it's one of the few albums. Well, we've had how many months this year? 2 months. Yeah, it was the first big album to like really jump out at me and being like consistently great all the way through, not a clunker. Yeah, and it's been a while since we've had, like, especially from a relatively unknown band, have this strong of a kind of like big debut.
And I mean, everything about it, the cover, I mean, it has this sort of like, you know, like unstoppable feel to it.
The funny thing, it's actually got some of the layout on the inside actually looks like some of the layouts in the new Cynic record.
Exactly,
which is kind of funny.
Yeah, and these guys, you could tell. I mean, you know, they took their name from Gore Guts. They obviously are very informed based on membership from Necrophagous Pestilence. You know, they're definitely very thoughtful of the Cynic and Death influence and all these other things. So they're almost like the world's greatest tribute band in a way. I mean, you can hear...
But it doesn't... I mean, it sounds familiar, but it doesn't sound ripped off. That's the thing. And it's one of the better... you know, I'd wager to say one of the best all-around technical death records
that I've ever heard. Yeah, you know, and I mean that's saying a lot, because
there's none of those wince moments like, "Ooh, why did you do that?"
Yeah, because I'd suffice to say that I'm one of the biggest Death fans that I know. They're probably my favorite Florida death metal band. I don't know where you fall, if you're more of a Morbid guy or not. But,
yeah, I'm kind of on the fence.
Yeah, you know, I don't. For some reason, Death was my first interview I ever did, and all these. So I have these sort of like memories locked away because of.
Yeah, my first Death was Spiritual Healing, and I wasn't incredibly impressed.
Yeah, so it's a rougher record to get behind, you know. So, but anyways, we hope you've enjoyed some Obscura, and let us know what you thought. I mean, you got a pretty good sampling of this newest record, and even Retribution, from what we've listened to, is a pretty solid record as well.
Yeah, it's not produced as quite as well, but
it's not as crisp, but it's a good way to close out. So anyways, enjoy Incarnated and No Spheres, and when we come back, we'll be talking about some of Ablaze My Sorrows.
Matter beyond time and life on measureless wings. Yet still I'm one with born and unborn things. Right past beyond time and life on measureless wings.
That was No Spheres and Incarnated from Obscura. So we hope you once again enjoyed the Obscura, and we're going to change gears here and change countries back over to the mid-90s.
Our most comfortable country, really.
Yeah, probably. Maybe that in England, the doom scene in England. But kind of the Gothenburg sound we've returned back to, which
this is kind of the second tier Gothenburg sound.
Oh,
too.
for sure.
Or
this
maybe borderline on
third tier. Yeah,
really.
maybe even kind of opening up a whole new window, a whole new way of approaching the whole sort of melodic twin lead kind of Swedish guitar style. And Ablaze My Sorrow was something you were trying to remember. You think you got this at Relapse?
I'm thinking, I worked at Relapse for 6 or 8 months in like 96. And this was kind of the time when a lot of the stuff was starting to chill out a little bit. Like, this was kind of a bizarre album to get.
Yeah.
And then it had the novelty factor that having, all the kids were barely old enough
they
to
were like
drive
14
a car.
and 15
they're
years
really,
old.
really young. And
I remember that being like one of the selling points when Chris got me to buy this record. And then I remember, pushing this off on other people.
yeah.
And this was a strange record because almost like Blind Guardian, it had such a mass appeal to non-metal audience. And I don't know if it was sort of the kitschy factor of these guys being like 14 and 15 and being like, hey, look at what this 14-year-old sounds like. And you'd play like this just fast, super melodic, like death metal song. And people would be like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Because you could do that with Eucharist too, with like The View. Like, listen to this drummer.
Did that actually work? Because I don't remember turning any non-metal people onto this kind of stuff.
It did work. You could use it as like sort of like a train wreck or something, or showing them like Harvey Sid Fisher or something like stupid on YouTube. Like they'd sit and watch it. Like that Cannibal Corpse YouTube video with like the dancing Indian girls and all that stuff.
Oh,
like
that.
I've showed that to so many non-metal fans and they just laugh at it. This is the same sort of thing. And I'm not making fun of Ablaze My Sorrows, but it was definitely a point where a lot of especially younger people younger than me in high school at the time, I think this was inspirational to them. Like these are some kids that were like into playing punk rock and stuff as 13-year-olds. And in fact, a group that's kind of big now that we grew up with, and actually, I don't know how much musical influence I had on them like now, but I think back in the day was Anathalo. And they're kind of a pretty interesting punk collective, indie collective, but I would throw Enslaved and Emperor at them and Blind Guardian and this and stuff. But a lot of my friends had this record who were really kind of, they had this and like Blind Guardian. That was like the only metal records they had,
That's weird.
And maybe Sky Dancer, for some reason. It was just an odd kind of thing.
I'm guessing that was probably a Central Michigan.
Definitely a Mount Pleasant factor. Yeah, there's something bizarre about Mount Pleasant High School. We sold 25 Blind Guardian records to bunch of northern Michigan white kids that don't listen to metal, so go figure. But what's cool about this is, obviously when you hear the music here in a second, you'll know that it's totally rooted in like Dark Tranquility, Nagelfar.
It's almost like
Eucharist.
Them emulating like the whole first wave of stuff on Rongen Records was really heavily influenced by like 80s thrash music, and this is almost like another version of that. So it's a weird. It's like, you're influenced by, say your dad plays something on the piano that's influenced by somebody else, but they probably don't even know how far back the things go. So
they probably didn't know Creator or like, Destruction very well, or anything that
they're almost
informed.
Like, they're almost like, emulating these people without knowing what came first, which in a way I think gave them pretty unique song structures, and they brought back the really fast single pick riff.
Yeah.
That had almost been gone at this point.
And to me, I'd say that this is more of a Gothenburg album than, say, like Slaughter of the Sun was.
Slaughter of the Soul?
Slaughter of the Soul, yeah. Slaughter of the Soul was more of a thrash metal record in its own right, but yet At the Gates always got lumped in with the Gothenburg sound, which they were to a certain extent. But to me, this is almost like you said, it's like a purified, like, I don't want to use the word cliche, but I will for lack of a better term. It's like this purified, like, here is Gothenburg, like, here it is. Like, I could give you, like, the 2 songs from Eucharist from, the War Comp, Sky Dancer, Jest Race from In Flames, and, like, this. And it's like, if you don't get it from those 4 things, then, like, you're never going to understand it. But, And Ablaze My Sorrow, we should say, had 3 records in there. We're going to kind of focus on the first one real quick, which is If Emotions Still Burn. And this was the record, which was put out by No Fashion back in late 95, early 96. We were trying to remember.
I think it actually came out in 96.
But this thing continued to sell right up until 97, I remember, because I still had friends that were still kind of buying this.
Well, this is one that I sold off. And then a couple years ago, got in line, grabbed it again, kind of rediscovered it again, because I'd never gotten the other 2 records.
Yeah,
and we'll talk about the Plague in a minute, but
and Anger, Hate, Fury, which is the last one that they put out in 2002. But the thing that I was telling Mark that I have not an epiphany about, but that really sort of came back to me as I was listening to this record, is that because of the youthful sort of energy that you hear in all these songs, there's like a lack of precision. There's a lack of like creative songwriting on some level. Like, it's cool songs and they're fun to listen to. But to me, I'm hearing a lot of this sort of pre-metalcore stuff that was going to come out and explode in the late 90s. That was all drenched in At the Gates and In Flames. This, The Shadows Fall, The Unearthed. I mean, this whole like eulogy, Trust Kill, like all these sort of ferret records. I mean, From Autumn to Ashes, like all these bands and labels that were sort of drenching themselves in this. If kids that were younger than me in northern Michigan were responding with like feverish like passion to this record, maybe like these kids were like, again, tapping into something that they didn't really know. The kids playing Ablaze My Sorrow. Now, this record wasn't popular by any means. That's the thing. But I think the people who got their hands on it could sense that, maybe this is like the future of where this sound was going to go.
Yeah. And
it's almost like these guys tapped into it before it was even popularized by like the New England bands like Shadows Fall and, this whole... 7 Day Curse and some of these bands that sort of jumped out.
There's probably more of the this hardcore hybrid bands or whatever than there ever were of the Gothenburg
sounds. Yeah, and to me this was like a precursor to it. It was like accidental, like serendipity or something. And going back and listening to it now, having survived the whole metalcore thing, and it's kind of like behind us now, hopefully. Yeah. It's you can kind of appreciate it and go, these guys were onto something and they didn't even know it. And people who heard them, it may have inspired, them to pick up a guitar and do their own sort of like not as technically prowess version of In Flames riffs, which is
I think that's important. I'd rather hear something that's more inventive, and it feels like it has like a little bit more enthusiasm more so than like virtuosity behind it. Like, we talked about in the Immortal episode, like, what was that, issue number 2 or 4?
Yeah.
Or back, but like Immortal sound would not have been what it was if they were really great musicians.
Same with the Stooges, or there's a lot, punk. Punk in its essence, the original form of punk is all about this youthful energy and nihilism and things. And I hear a lot of it in these songs that we're going to hear in a second. So, but anyways, see what you think. If you haven't heard of Ablaze My Sorrow and you're a fan of the Gothenburg sound, this will be interesting for you to experience, because you're hearing it 15 years later. It really it may not catch on the same way that it catches to us. But we're gonna hear a trio of tunes from their first record. We're gonna hear The Rain That Falls, Rise Above the Storming Sea, and As I Face the Eternity. So enjoy.
I
As I Face the Eternity, Rise Above the Storming Sea, and The Rain That Falls, which of course has that famous little cheesy acoustic kind of part in it, which every time I hear it, it brings a smile on my face. Reminds me of like my childhood or something. So, but next we're going to kind of dive into their second record, which is a really imbalanced record, wouldn't you say?
It's really poorly produced. The thing that jumped out at me right away was the drum production. Sounds like he's beating on like a wet cardboard box. Yeah. And he seems like he's a beat behind the guitar the whole time too. It's really bizarre. But so we were going to play a couple songs off this record just to kind of show the transition between the first and the third records, but just I mean, it was too similar really, so we ended up just pulling the song
I can't remember
bizarrely named As the Dove Falls Turn Apart, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And this translation issue.
And this one seemed to be like to be the least like If Emotions Still Burn. I mean, it was sort of like
a Dark Tranquility of the Mind's Eye almost.
Yeah,
but then with like power metal
instead of the female vocals.
And it almost sounded. I could have swore it was a chick until the total power metal cock rock thing at the end.
It's an interesting tune. It's got some different like musical dynamics, but you can definitely tell that this is a band that can't quite find their footing. You know, like the metal world, as we've talked about, changed significantly in like 97, 98. I mean, death metal was really like kind of dead in the water. Black metal was sort of reigning king. Mm-hmm. You know, and these guys didn't really know what to do. They kind of got a late start on it. They're young. They think they have a direction. And
one of their contemporaries is Soilwork.
For sure.
Which, what was it? Steel Bath Suicide came out probably the same time as Emotions Still Burn.
Yeah, and Soilwork was able to find a way to like make a niche for themselves. And we don't want to say Gothenburg was dead, because clearly In Flames is on the rise at this point. I mean, they're rising popularity, but it was hard to play like Gothenburg circa 95 still, which is what you heard on the first record. Yeah, this was a little tougher.
Well, the scene it progressed almost quicker than the Stockholm scene did.
Yeah,
it was just like a year later, Entomb sounded completely different. That kind of thing.
Yeah, there's
like no room for people to be sticking to their guns.
Yeah, and so you hear that with this record, and yes, in particular the song. And I'm curious, what someone who's hearing it back to back with the first record, if you'll notice as huge of a difference as we did, because no one I knew really bought The Plague when this came out.
I've never heard it until just this last year. Chris pulled it out and let me check it out. But we should also mention there's a different vocalist this time around. There's
a different vocalist
on every album.
Yeah, and because we're gonna go right from As the Dove Falls Turn Apart right into a trio of songs from their last record from 2002, Anger, Hate, and Fury. Which do you have some words? You're more familiar, I guess, with this.
Yeah, well, real quickly on The Plague, actually, the vocalist, which name escapes me right now, is on Cromlich. Which is,
Vulture Tones.
The Vulture Tones is a CD or an EP that came out. When was it? In 2002, 3?
2001, 2002, somewhere
right in that area. But I don't know how many people got it. It was pretty
awesome, pretty
rare, but really, I mean, great mix of like Eucharist and Ablaze My Sorrow-ish kind of tendency. So that was
So, but then we're also going to have a new vocalist on Anger, Hate, and Fury.
Yep.
So,
which, I mean, they're all good in their own rights, I guess. But no, the Anger, Hate, and Fury, actually, it seems like they finally figured out we shouldn't really be writing 4.5-minute songs. We're better at writing 2-minute songs.
Yeah.
And I think it really kind of shines in these. And they actually, especially with Machine Supreme, there's some great like double bass mixed with machine gun samples, and
it's kind of a harsher Soilwork kind of sound. You know, less indulgent in a way than what Soilwork was doing. And you're gonna hear like this really like almost a Nagelfar type thing, but like tighter, less black metal, but just more kind of like that type of Nagelfar Dark Tranquility. But you said condensed to like 2-minute little versions, you know. And in Anger, Hate, and Fury is a really strange record, because hearing it now, we probably would have thought it was stock if we had heard it in 2002. Like, we probably been like, oh, this is a good record, but
it's really similar to actually I think it's more dynamic now that I hear it again compared to like Soilworks Predator's Portrait.
Yeah, or the Crowned in Terror and things like that, you know. Or,
well, Crowned in Terror pretty much destroyed everything else.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you
unless you've had the unfortunate time of listening to the new one re-recorded with the old guys' vocals, which is like, what's the point?
Waste of time.
And they changed the solos and it sounds like turd. So definitely seek out the original one with Tampa.
And we may be doing who knows? I could see a Crown show down the road someday. But anyways, we're gonna hear As the Dove Falls Turn Apart, which we have no idea what that means. And then we're going to hear a trio of songs from Anger, Hate, and Fury, and then come back with our goodbyes. We'll hear Erased, Revised, Machine Supreme, and Retention of Illusion, which I'm going to talk about the riff in this song, because if anyone can figure it out and tell me what the hell it is, I'll give you props. I'll give you $1 and say your name on the air. So, all right, enjoy.
begging for mercy. No fucking wave of the going down. Religious fanatic from the cradle to the grave. Christian pedophilia, is that your way to save? What can't you see beyond illusion? The lie, just sitting there playing to an empty sky. I hate you, I curse you. The truth is what I think. I hate you, I curse you. My word is your defense.
Between your faith and my clock hanging in the mirror, I take my clock.
Religious fanatic from the cradle to the grave. Christian pedophilia, is that your way to save? Why can't you see beyond illusion? The lie, just sitting there playing to an empty sky. Day in, day out, before your precious icon. Your life is mine to wait, blindfolded and on God. I deny your Lord's existence, only for the nothing more than fantasy. Let the legend, Lord of Lies.
And we're back. That was Retention of Illusion, Machine Supreme, Erased, Revised, all from Anger, Hate, and Fury. And then, of course, we open with the tune from The Plague.
As the dove falls, turn apart.
God, that's going to throw me off. It's like a bad poem or something. But Retention of Illusion was a cool tune in particular. The vocals in there, I was telling you, reminded me a lot of like Fear Factory, like Burton C. Bell's kind of when he sings clean.
Burton C. Bell for the Geezer Butler project,
and for the Geezer Butler project. You gotta remember when that kind of stuff came out, I was still an impressionable 16-year-old, and I was buying a lot of good stuff, and I was buying like a lot of other things because it was all that was in front of me.
Sure.
You know?
That helped refine your taste.
Yeah, that's true. And I have a heavy dose of knowledge of mid '90s metal. Yeah, Headbangers Ball metal, as I'd like to call it. But we're gonna close things out with our final Ablaze My Sorrow tune, and this features a guest appearance from
Thomas Lindbergh.
Yeah, somebody we're
Mr.
a big fan of.
At the Gates himself.
Yeah, Mr. At the Gates, Mr. Dysphere, Mr. Great Deceiver, you name it. Grotesque. And it's a tune called "Slit Wide Open," and it's just, again, standard Swedish death metal stuff with Thomas kind of screaming over it. But one of the things you picked up on that you pointed out was right around like the 2 minute mark or so, or even prior to that, is this breakdown that sounds very much like the style of guitar playing that Isan does in Emperor.
Oh, yeah, where he's hitting harmonics.
Yeah.
But it sounds like one of the later on Emperor records.
It sounds like something from Prometheus or something.
Oh, totally, yeah.
So, but it's a cool kind of way of, it's maybe where the future of the band would have gone after this. Who knows? Adding more.
The funny thing,
different things.
They didn't break up till 2006.
Oh, really? So they thought about a record for 4 years and then kind of bounced around.
Yeah.
So, but hopefully, let us know what you thought of the split format. It was something we wanted to try. Just get into some bands that maybe we couldn't stretch out to a full set of full podcast episodes. Sorry, got tongue twisted there. And send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Check out the website, which is again
requiempodcast.com.
Yeah, and let us know what you think. And hopefully pretty soon we'll send you there to stream entire episodes and get you.
Or actually, if you're already getting it through iTunes, we'll make it a seamless experience. You'll keep getting them.
There you go.
But they might be just a little bit longer. So.
Yeah, cool. So send us your thoughts and let us know what you think. And that's about it for me. This is Jason.
And Mark.
And this is Slit Wide Open from Ablaze My Sorrow.